Hey, everybody, welcome to our Week in Review. I am Stephan Cox, along with the chair of the King County Democrat, Shasti Conrad. Hello, Shasti.
Hi, Stephan.
And also managing partner of Left Wing Digital, Will Casey. Hello, Will.
Always great to talk to you, Stephan.
Likewise, my brother. So listen, you guys, I got to get something off my chest, and we'll get to the news in a second. I just want to gripe. I got fooled again by fake spring, and I'm not happy. And I just say, gang, for those of you not in Western Washington, so fake spring is this thing that happens every late February. We get like 2 or 3 days of sun. You think it's spring, you put the shorts on, and then all of a sudden, just boom, the monoclot is back. You go back to doom and gloom. So I'm not only pissed about fake spring, I'm pissed at myself for like buying it, for getting fooled like every year. Shasti, help me out. I'm sure you're less gullible than I am, right?
I wish I could say that, but I totally was like, we did it. We made it through winter. I think we're going to be okay, everybody. And then yesterday and this morning, I was like, oh, no. Nope. Fooled again.
What about you, Will?
Oh, I mean, I am still a relatively new Washingtonian, so I was like all excited. I was bragging to my roommate. I was just like, "Oh, we can finally go running again. This is going to be great." And then I woke up this morning, and the world is just like, "No, it's still going to be like this until June." So,
fortunately, I have a real grudging love of like gray and rain and stuff like that. I just like a little variety. Yeah. So anyway, we're it'll be back in June. Don't worry, gang. We only have to wait another like 8 weeks. All right, so let's jump into the news. This week, we're going to talk about progressive taxation because it seems to be having a genuine moment right now. Here in Washington, where we have the most regressive tax system in the nation, there are several taxation bills that have made it out of committee in the state legislature for the very first time, and we're going to be talking about that with the stranger's Rich Smith in the second half of the show. But there is also a big sweeping bill happening at the federal level. This is called the Wealth Tax Act. This is sponsored by Elizabeth Warren in the Senate and then by Brendan Boyle and Pramila Jayapal. Hey, we know that name in the House. Will, let's start with you. What can you tell us about this bill?
So this is a proposal to tax total net worth, not just people's income, right? So you're normally probably used to paying your taxes at the end of the year. You might get a little bit of money back. You might have to pay a little bit depending on, sort of what your circumstances are. But this is, not just looking at income that people have, acquired in a given year. This is about the wealth that, those at the very, very top are hoarding from us. So, this is about going after the Fabergé eggs and the Rembrandts, not just CEO stock options. And, at a time when working people are struggling to make ends meet, because of the pandemic, since it's not their fault, we really just can't be rewarding folks who already have more wealth than their great grandkids will ever spend.
Well, yeah, and one of the designs in this is to help close the wealth gap that was brought about by the pandemic, because the rich got a hell of a lot richer during the pandemic. Can you tell us some of those numbers, because they're jaw-dropping?
Yeah. This is enough to get you out of bed in the morning. In the 11 months since the start of the pandemic lockdowns, total wealth for billionaires in the United States has increased $1.3 trillion, or 44%. So let's, just for scale, the entire COVID relief package that the Senate is now negotiating, that's $1.9 trillion. This is $1.3 trillion. So over those same 11 months, 73 million Americans lost jobs. 25 million caught the coronavirus, and 500,000 have died. So, just a little bit of quantifying the injustice that's happening in our economy right now.
Yeah, it's totally sobering and enraging. And we know at least 2 residents here in our state who have benefited mightily from the conditions of the pandemic. Shasti, I'm just going to ask you, why do you think that progressive taxation is finally being discussed right now in a very serious way? What is it about this moment, do you think?
Well, I think the pandemic has really laid bare that there is no such thing as a self-made billionaire. And in fact, there really should not be billionaires. That should not be something that we have when you have the type of wealth disparities and inequalities that we have. I was just pulling up. There was a tweet that was passed around earlier this week that in 2009, Jeff Bezos had 6.8 billion. In 2020,
that's the one I was talking about. Yeah,
184 billion dollars. And Mark Zuckerberg in 2009, $2 billion. In 2020, $103 billion. I mean, so, there's this whole sense of like, I think people feel like they want to put people up on pedestals, and it's like, oh, they've worked so hard for that. But the people who are actually really working hard are those people that are essential care workers, who are working in the grocery stores, who have fed our families for this past year. And so we just have to that's the solidarity that we have to have, is with those folks. When, as a reminder, the federal minimum wage has remained the same decade after decade after decade, while these folks have just added to their net worth. And it's gross. And I think people are finally seeing that we can't continue on this track. We have to do something different. And I'm proud to see it happening, at the federal level in Congress, led by Pramila Jayapal, and also here led by Representative Noel Frame in the Washington State Legislature.
Yeah, and we actually did a segment on the pod with her. If anybody wants to go back and check that out, it's phenomenal. And we will be talking about her wealth tax bill here stateside in the second half, like I say, with Rich Smith. Will, one of the challenges of this wealth tax bill, the federal one, is the fact that the ultra wealthy have historically been very, very adept at evading things like paying taxes on their wealth. So talk a little bit about how the Warren-Jayapal bill makes sure that they pay.
Well, I want to start first with, just a recognition that we are able in some circumstances to get the very, very wealthy in this country to follow the rule of law. I mean, Jeff Bezos just had to document his entire net worth when he went through a divorce case here in, King County at the Superior Court. So if a state court can get him to actually, do an audit of his assets for that reason, I'm sure that the IRS can get the job done. But just to make sure that they have the money to do it, the Jayapal Warren bill includes $100 billion to invest in rebuilding and strengthening the IRS, which makes sure the agency has the resources to hire and train additional personnel, modernize their IT systems, build new asset valuation processes, report out to, Congress on these things, and also make sure that, enforcement requirements for this bill are met. They also include a 30% minimum audit rate for taxpayers that are subject to the ultramillionaire tax. That's what they call their bill, the wealth tax. And I think that that's actually the most important out of this whole situation, because currently the IRS is actually spending more resources auditing people who get the earned income tax credit to make sure that they are actually following through on the work requirements than they are, auditing people who would qualify for this ultramillionaire wealth tax. And so I think that that is just a fundamental misordering of priorities. And so I think that as any bill that involves Elizabeth Warren and Pramila Jayapal, it's extremely well thought out, and they've made sure to close all the loopholes that the extremely wealthy might try to use to get out of this. And then finally, I think they've also come up with a 40%, what they call an exit tax on the net worth of anyone who qualifies under this bill, which is a threshold of $50 million, just in case anyone in the audience was worried they might have to pay it. If you've got 50 million laying around, I think you're going to be okay. So in case someone tries to leave the country and say like, oh, I'm just going to, migrate to Liechtenstein or something, we're going to claw back 40% of those assets before they leave. So
I love the fact that Elizabeth Warren and Pramila Jayapal have thought like rich people, ultra wealthy people in all of this. Because it's like, yeah, oh, you're a citizen of Turks and Caicos now? Okay, cool. That's fine, but we'll take 40%. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, this is what I can't wrap my head around, and maybe you guys can help me with this. The wealth tax is aimed at only 100,000 of the wealthiest families in America, which means that by my math, and somebody correct me here because I was definitely not a math major, but that means 0.0003% of the population will be impacted. So it should have broad support, but it is still not expected to pass. Will, I'll just ask you, and then Shasti, I'm going to ask you as well. What do you think the problem is here?
Well, I mean, frankly, I think the problem is that just, we are too afraid of using our own power, right? I think that, there's this constant drumbeat of, being afraid of quote unquote Democratic overreach when, we watched the Republicans basically face no accountability, at the presidential level anyway, for giving trillions of dollars in unfunded tax cuts to, the wealthy and big corporations. We just barely, they did basically everything on Donald Trump and Mitch McConnell's wish list. And, we just barely got the Senate back and, lost seats in the House. So I think, there's clearly a separation here between what people in DC think the voters care about and, what voters actually care about. But until we, figure out that problem, it's going to be slow going here for a lot of these important pieces of legislation.
I'm just going to broaden that question to you, Shasti, and just take a 30,000-foot view. Why do you think passing progressive taxation generally is so difficult in this country?
I think, to Will's point, I think that, there is this sort of American myth of we're all about to just be millionaires. We're all about to we're on the verge of it. There's a Steinbeck quote of that poor people in America see themselves not as an exploited proletariat, but as temporarily embarrassed millionaires, and that they're on the verge. And I think that was a lot of what the allure was with Donald Trump, is that, it was like, hey, I could be him someday if I just, I read his lame book or I watch one of his stupid shows, then, I'm next. And so people think about well, aspirationally, when I get there, I will have worked hard for it, and I don't want anybody to take what's mine, not recognizing that they are in the moment, everything's being taken from them. Middle class, working class folks are being just ripped apart from how much the government and really the wealthy are benefiting off of their labor. And they're paying. I mean, I always think of what Warren Buffett would say about how his secretary paid more in taxes than he did. And, I think that we have to move away from this idea too, that billionaires are job creators. I think people are really attached to this idea that we need billionaires to be able to provide jobs, and it's that kind of it's just it's patriarchal, and it doesn't work. It's not true. And I think those of us here in Washington State, particularly in King County, know that Jeff Bezos hasn't done anything for this city to make it better. In fact, it is directly Amazon has directly contributed to, I think, the housing and homelessness crisis that we are in right now. And so I think that is why it's we have to break up this idea that we need these people and that they're looking out for us. They're not. We know that they're looking out just for themselves, and it's time to hold them accountable.
That reminds me of two things, and I believe it was Paul Ryan who referred to makers and takers, and then also Bernie Sanders' idea of corporate welfare. I think we treat our corporations and our billionaires much more beneficently than we do our working class in this country. And I'll just ask you, Shasti, I wonder if any of this has to do with the dynamics of the Democratic Party itself. I saw a great tweet by Ellie Mistal, who writes for the Mother Jones, among others. And she said, Dems win power, moderate Dems refuse to let Dems use power, Dems lose power, moderate Dems blame progressives for being too radical, lather, rinse, repeat. And I'll just ask you, do you have any insight into how we as progressives can break that cycle?
Well, I think, it starts with winning elections, but we have to keep pushing on the type of Democrats that we are electing. I woke up angry this morning because I saw that Chris Coons and, Shaheen and this Delaware and New Hampshire, which are safely Democratic states. And those both senators from Delaware and New Hampshire didn't vote to support raising the federal minimum wage. And it makes me, really, it's I've just keep thinking about those of us who worked so hard to win elections and get people into office. And then they get there and they fail us. They forget us. They forget the people who helped them get there. And that is the pressure that I think Indivisible has been so excellent at creating, is that we have to keep that up. And we have to remind them that they represent us, that they are there because of us. And we have to make sure that we are putting forth people who are legitimate progressives and stop feeding this cycle that you just described of, we let people believe that their seats are at stake if they do anything. And instead it's your seats are at stake when you do nothing. So that is the key. And I'm done. I'm sick and tired of it. And I'm not willing to be quiet about it anymore.
I'm glad that you brought up Indivisible as well, because I think a lot of people in Indivisible in a post-Trump environment, three words I do not tire of saying, are sort of wondering of what is our role to play right now. And I think you absolutely hit on it. It is our job right now to push the party to the left and really push them to action. Will, I just will ask you as we kind of close out on this segment, if the wealth tax does not pass, as and sadly is expected not to, how do you think progressives can make the most of this moment?
Well, I think this is a perfect moment for us to really capitalize on this as a messaging opportunity, right? Because I think that even the way that we talk to ourselves, and even the way that you were just framing this, Stephan, of, we need to push the party to the left, I think we have to get out of this sort of left-right dynamic, because it implicitly asserts this conclusion that being closer to the center is good and being farther from the center is bad and extreme, when really what we're talking about here is like whether or not the policy positions that our elected officials are holding are sufficient to meet the moment that we're in, right? Because we've seen the Republican Party abdicate entirely, the field of ideas. They do not have solutions whatsoever, right? So it's not really useful to talk about things in terms of a left-right dynamic when there's no right to compromise with, right? Like there's no one on the other side of the aisle who's interested in doing literally anything, as every single House Republican voted against the COVID relief bill because, they'd rather deprive Joe Biden of the cover of bipartisanship than like actually help people who are in crisis. And so we just have to start reframing things around like, are you proposing an idea that's going to do the thing, or just like make it look like you're making some progress towards doing the thing? Right. And I think when it comes to, having a just and equitable tax system, this is a great place for us to start. And, we need to win the messaging war so that when this comes up again, it's viewed as something that is, common sense rather than, a left or progressive idea.
I like that framing a lot. So listen, as I mentioned at the top, we have a number of progressive bills making the rounds here in the Washington state legislature, and they are all designed to help rebalance our tax system, which is famously the most upside down in the nation. And this means essentially that the lowest earners spend by some estimates, 13.3% of their income on sales and excise taxes, compared with only 1.7% for top earners. So we keep taxing the people in our society who can least afford it. So to break all this down, we're going to say goodbye to our friend Will here, and we are going to bring in, technology, and we're going to bring in our friend Rich Smith. He, of course, writes for The Stranger, and we are so glad to have him with us again. Rich, how are you, man?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing fine. Can I ask you, do you have any feelings about fixed spring?
Well, I didn't until you mentioned it, and then suddenly I was filled with a rush of feelings. But yeah, I guess I feel betrayed on the one hand, but I also feel like I lived here for a little while. This is what the weather does during this time, and so I'm glad at least that the planet isn't lying to me.
Even if the weather is lying to you, then the planet is not. The planet's doing its job. So, and I'll ask you also the question that I posed at the top of the show, which is, why do you think right now progressive taxation is having a moment, both nationally and here in Washington?
Well, I think part of the answer in Washington state is that we, and maybe this is the answer nationally too, is just that after the pandemic, there was a huge fear of a financial collapse, and huge holes were being blown in the budgets. The first revenue forecast in Washington said that we were going to have a $9 billion budget hole in the next budget, which goes over the course of 2 years. And I think that was enough. It was a large enough gap for people to be like, you know what? Don't we have a capital gains tax lying around somewhere that might help fill this? Start reaching for some more of these proposals that have been in the works for a while. And also in Washington, I think there's kind of just increasing awareness that of our lopsided tax system. It's been in the newspapers for 20 years that Washington has had the most regressive tax system. This is not a new thing, but kind of like what Will was mentioning in the last segment, that it has just become kind of common sense that our tax system sucks. And I think that that's sort of sunk in at the right time this year, I think.
But Rich, with we have these Democratic majorities in the state legislature, we elect these people to go and do this work. It's still so hard to get this passed. I mean, it's looking like it's not going to happen. Like, why do you think that is?
I mean, we have because the Democratic majority in the Senate, at least, is on tax issues, is somewhat fake or not quite there. I think that at least when it comes to getting some of these taxes through the Senate, you can only lose 5 senators before they're endangered. And there's just a bunch of Democrats who aren't going to do it. And the reasons for that are, some genuinely, there's cynical and non-cynical reasons for that. Some, I think, genuinely believe that taxing rich people or corporations is bad for the economy. Mark Mullet, for instance, he was a bank executive, and he's just not gonna raise taxes if he doesn't have to. He's happy saying that, and I think a lot of it is personal relationships. I mean, we've got pretty good election laws that keep kind of corruption via huge donations down. I mean, obviously IEs exist and people feel beholden to corporations and stuff. But, I think that a lot of the people who serve, a majority of the people who serve in the Senate come from industry, come from business. Their friends are in business. If they want to leave, the legislature at some point, they would like to maintain good relationships with people in business. I think a lot of that is on the minds of some of these politicians. And I also think that a lot of them, even though they're Democrats, don't hang out with poor people. Like, they don't know they know deeply the pain of having to pay $7,000 worth of taxes on $100,000 worth of profit on something that they didn't do, like for money that they didn't really make. They kind of feel that sting, but I don't think a lot of them just feel the sting, the daily grind of the grocery store worker, who's like, $4 raise is a life-saving, thing to happen in your life. Like, it's just like, woo, my year is fine. Like, I don't think that they feel that a lot. So I think that the mixture of personal belief and personal relationships influence these decisions a lot, and the perception that people in their swing districts aren't going to want to tax the rich or would penalize them at the ballot box for not taxing the rich.
You were talking about kind of the idea, the sting of capital gains, and I want to come back to that in just a second. But Shasti, I have a question for you, and because Rich is really talking about, in part why the Democrats might oppose progressive taxation. We know largely why state Republicans say they do, which is that they say, hey, we got enough money, why move things around? And I'll ask you, how do you think we effectively relay the message that this is not about having enough funds, this is about fairness? How do we get that message across?
I mean, we take a stand, we say it plainly, which is that our tax codes reflect our values, and that here in Washington state, we should be standing up for the working poor. President Biden has a saying that, if you want to know what someone's values are, look at their budget, look at how they account and move money around. And the state should be standing up for something more than what they are right now.
Yeah, 100% agreed on that. Rich, I'll just ask you this. We have been watching the Democrats have a comfortable majority in the last few sessions and still not pass any meaningful tax reform. And a lot of people have some high hopes for a few pieces of legislation this year. First and foremost of which, as I was hinting at earlier, is the capital gains tax. So this is Senate Bill 5096. This is Senator June Robinson's bill. You were touching on it a little bit earlier, but can you just flesh it out a little bit more? What is a capital gains tax? How does it work? Who gets impacted?
Yeah, it's a tax on the exchange of high value assets. So stuff like stocks and bonds. Before it was written out of the bill, stuff like your third home, that kind of thing. And so the tax would impose, or this version of the tax would impose a 7% tax on the profits of, let's say, the sale of a stock over $250,000. So you could cash in on your stocks, and whatever that means. And some people do this all the time. People tell me, but you can cash in on your stocks and you would get let's say you cashed in on $400,000 of stocks. The state doesn't tax the first 250,000 of that. So it's just a 7% tax on the rest of it. So you would hand over a few $1,000 to cash in on a capital event that, and I cannot stress this enough, you did nothing to earn.
No sweat equity.
This is just that money that you're cashing in on made its own money. Like you weren't worked extra hours so that you could to get this extra benefit. It just was in the air, and because of the way finance works, you get more of it. Like it sucks. It's crazy. Anyway, so to finish the thought, it would hit all of 8,000 people in a state of 7.5 million, which is 0.1 or 0.2% of the population. Just to give you an idea of how much this bill has already been watered down, in 2019, the tax would have hit 42,000 people, and even that was a very low percentage. So it's just the cream of the crop, literally the most expensive transactions that you can imagine, and that I have to imagine because I've never felt the sting of paying this kind of tax. But that's what it would do. Yeah.
So yeah, and you've talked about. Excuse me.
I should say, not to only talk about the stick here, but the money. It would raise about $1 billion over 2 years, and the money would go into education trust fund account and pay for childcare. A lot of the Senate Dems who are supporting this bill say, and then the rest would go into a tax fairness account that they would use to kind of lower more aggressive taxes on aggregate over the years. So they would maybe lower the property tax, or maybe it would go into a working families tax credit, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So that's where it would go. All
right. Well, yeah. So, I mean, you and Shasti and I, to an extent, have all laid out the reasons why, this is a difficult thing to pass. In fact, this has been pushed for the last 8 sessions. This is the first time that it has been voted out of committee. And I think you're getting at some of the reasons as to why, because it's been watered down significantly. But Shasti, I'll just ask you as an observer, are you hopeful that maybe this thing might pass this time around?
I'm not hearing good things. So I want to be hopeful.
Yeah.
I really want to be hopeful, but I'm not hearing that it's likely that it is going to go as far as we would like it to.
Well, we also, just kind of going down the other few bills that we have in consideration here, we have our own wealth tax bill, as I mentioned, and that dropped well before Senator Warren's bill, because that's how we roll here in Washington. This is Noel Frame's wealth tax bill. This is 1406. This would impose a 1% tax on individuals with a net worth of $1 billion or more. This is slated to bring in an estimated $2.25 billion in 2023, or 2.5 billion in 2024. Rich, I'm just going to ask you, it is hard to imagine what the arguments against this could possibly be. The vast majority of Republicans' constituents are not billionaires. But what are they saying in opposition to this?
Well, their main thing is you're going to chase away the billionaires, who are, of course, the job creators. And if you do that, then the entire state economy will collapse, or, whatever. But yeah, so their argument is that the billionaires will run away. The evidence suggests that that's probably not the case. There's not people who have looked into this, suggest that relative tax burdens in states is not the thing that's going to make a billionaire move from one place to another. They are people too, and like certain lakes and shit. They want to be close to the industries that they have built using exploited labor, etc. And so that's their main that's their main objection. And I don't know. I don't know why it's like they don't learn. Washington State gave Boeing the biggest tax break in the history of the United States, $6.8 billion. And then they left, right? Yeah. I mean, the truth is these people and their companies and their jobs will go wherever they want to, and they will put up a big fight against taxes that they don't want to pay because it's simply cheaper to do that than to pay the tax. Like that's the simple calculus. It's not particularly difficult to understand. And of course, Republicans will jump all over that and just try to scare people by saying that jobs will go away, despite the fact that there's not much evidence that it would happen.
Yeah, I mean, there are other states, as you say, that have income tax and capital gains, and billionaires live there as well. And also, I'm just going to put this out there, and this is a dark thought. I think Boeing is having some karmic retribution. I really do.
Yeah. Have fun in South Carolina.
Well, so Shasti, and Representative Frame, there is so much to like about this wealth tax bill. What are your thoughts on it?
I mean, I think, as Rich was saying, there's been so many iterations the last couple of years of something like this. And I think that it's one of the best it's the best version that we've had. And I think Representative Frame has been able to frame it in a really well sort of way that, where it's sort of like it catches the billionaires in some ways, but it also sort of doesn't freak them out too much. Although any little thing seems to panic that, the 8,000 people that'll be impacted by it. I think, I mean, the newer legislators that are in there, I think they were elected and committed to taking action on this. I think the hard part is that there are a number of incumbents, even on the Democratic side, that, like Rich was saying, they're looking at what happens after they leave, and they're thinking about where do they end up, what jobs are they going to end up with, and that is what is the impediment. It's not, the bill itself is strong and it's solid, and it'll do not all that needs to be done, but it'll do a lot of it. It is a political calculus that is happening with the players in the state legislature that I think that are blocking it. I also think ego is playing a big part of it, because there are people who don't want Representative Frame, who is a younger woman, to get the credit for something like this. They would rather, and they're looking at their next races in the next 2 years, and they're saying, I don't want to piss off my billionaire friends, which they don't really have any, but they think that they do. And, and then they want to be able to take credit for things. And I think that's actually probably the biggest problem.
Wow. That's depressing, but really, I'm sure incredibly accurate. Rich, I want to talk also, just really briefly touch on the estate tax. This is Representative Tina Orwell's bill. This is 1465. It's pretty opaque and it's a real long shot. But I would love for you to just kind of tell people, give us a rough outline of what this does.
Can I, before I answer that, can I comment on something Shasti said? Because I just want to why is personal relationships with corporations such a problem in our state legislature? Because unlike what Republicans would like you to believe, that we don't do a lot of big government stuff here in Washington. People were dunking on Texas and their legislature for only meeting 6 months twice a year, and using that as evidence that they don't do. That's how much they hate government there. We meet 4 months 1 year and 2 months the next year. We meet as often as Texas legislature does, so it's like, if the big thing that nobody wants to hear is that we actually have to make the legislature a job, and we have to pay people enough money to do it well, and so we can expand the different kinds of people in there, so we can move on legislation that actually touches people in their day-to-day lives. And Shasti, did you want to jump in?
I was just going to jump in. Yeah, I was just going to jump in and say too, of who then is able to have a job like that.
Mm-hmm.
The type of folks who can run where they can take only 4 months off from another type of job or other types of responsibilities. And, they make $40,000, basically a little more than that, but in that role. And most of the people who get drawn into that, they're lawyers, or they're real estate, or they're other type, and so it's really hard if you are a working person who wants to help your community and you can't really afford to be able to step away from a job or family responsibilities to go and do that for a short period. I mean, that I am a huge proponent of all year round. So, because it should be a full-time job, that should be what they're committed to doing. And I think that is also a big problem that we have here in Washington State.
Yeah.
I've talked off the record with 3 members of the legislature about this very thing, and they all say exactly what you say. It's ironic that a citizen legislature is what it's supposed to be, and ultimately it doesn't really wind up being that in practice. And so, speaking of wealth impacting the way that our legislature does business, let's talk briefly about the estate tax, Rich. And like I said, I don't want to spend too much time on it because it doesn't really have it doesn't have much of a shot this year, but I think people deserve to know about it. So can you just tell us briefly what Tina Orwell's estate tax does?
Yes, I'll do the estate tax, and then I'll loop back to the working families tax credit.
We'll end on that for sure.
Okay. The estate tax, when a rich person dies, instead of the state taking their wealth and redistributing it to the society that created the conditions to make that wealth possible, we just take a little tax on their right to transfer that wealth or that estate to whoever they want. And the bill would ultimately make it a little bit more of a progressive tax. So it would raise the bottom threshold for having to pay the tax in the first place to $2.5 million. So all of us who are not passing along $2.5 million to somebody would not have to pay this tax. It would also sweeten the pot for people in this middle estate tax range. So it would lower the amount of tax that they would have to pay. And it would also, on the high end, increase the highest bracket or margin that the tax would hit. So it would basically just raise taxes a little bit on the most expensive estate and lower them for everybody else.
All right. And then, let's talk about Representative Mila Ty's working family tax credit. This is HB 1297, also known as the recovery rebate. And this had a 25-8 vote in the House Appropriations Committee, a pretty strongly bipartisan vote. Do you feel like there's momentum for this bill?
Yeah, I think that it's been the law passed in I think what was it 2008 originally. We've just never funded it, and so this bill would fund it. It's got bipartisan support, so I think that bodes well. I haven't asked people about it recently because I thought it was fine, so I might be off here on my estimates, but it seems like if Republicans like it and Democrats like it, then it'll go through.
Yeah. Well,
have you heard otherwise?
No, and in fact, I'm looking right here, and I don't have any further intel on it. I do have a call to action as we close out, though. And Shasti, I'll just let you button this whole thing by asking you kind of a larger question, which is, we know that a lot of the oxygen tends to get taken up by issues at the national level. And, we started there, and we started there for a reason. But I think it's a good reminder for people to remember why it's so important to focus on these bills right here at home. What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I mean, local issues are where, when you're closest to the problem, you're closest to the solution. And so these are the decisions that are going to make an impact in our lives right here in Washington State right away. And we have our best chance of being able to actually move the needle. It is much harder to try to wrangle, 435 people across the nation in DC. And there's a lot of other players. There's a lot more money being spent into trying to influence. And so there's a real chance here to actually get these things done, and then to be a model for what works for the rest of the country.
Yeah, absolutely right. So with that in mind, I do have some calls to action, because we have talked about what we as progressive activists can do, and particularly indivisible members. So let's talk about the action on the working family tax credit, HB 1297. This is scheduled to get a vote in the House on Sunday, March 7th. That is coming right up. So email or call your representative in support of 1297. The wealth tax, HB 1406, is currently in the House Finance Committee. So the action there is to contact the chair, which of course is Noelle Frame. And just let her know that you support it. She's the author, so obviously she doesn't need any pushing there, but it just helps her to know that there's a lot of public support around the bill. And then finally, the capital gains tax. This is SB 5096. Let your senator know that you want him or her to vote for it when it comes up for a floor vote before March 10th. And all of that's going to be in the show notes there for everybody, and also at indivisiblepodcast.org. And that is it for this week. Thank you so much, Rich Smith. Oh, you got one more thing you want to add, Ben?
Just that the Senate, it looks like the capital gains is going to the floor in the Senate Saturday. So if you want to do that, do it today.
Okay. Let me because listen, gang. This is a live recording, but I'm going to edit this shit for the. I'm going to edit this for the podcast. So, help me out here. So March 10th. What is the date? What is the date on Saturday?
The 6th.
Okay. So wow. Oh, so geez. Of course, it's Friday. Good Lord. Yeah. So tomorrow is Saturday. So I'm going to just say it's coming up for a floor vote on like tomorrow.
That's what my Northwest is reporting, and yeah.
Okay, cool. I'm going to repeat that. And then finally, the capital gains tax, SB 5096. You got to jump on this one right now, today. Let your senator know that you want him or her to vote for it when it comes up for a floor vote tomorrow, March 6th. And again, all this is going to be in the show notes and also at indivisiblepodcast.org. And that will do it for this week. Rich, as always, thanks, man.
Thanks, Stephan and Shasti.
For Shasti Conrad and Will Casey, I am Stephan Cox, and we will see you next week. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.